Good morning. My name is Anna, and you're watching Wake Up Well. And today we're going to just look at a little bit of Psalm 22. I'm just going to read from verse 1, which says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, by night, but I find no rest. Now, this psalm, we often reference it at Easter. We used it on our Good Friday service. It's often known as the Psalm of the Cross, and that's for a number of different reasons. Firstly, that first line, my God, why have you forsaken me, was some of the last words of Jesus as he hung on the cross. He used this psalm. But there are other verses in the psalm that also point to the way in which Jesus died on the cross. For example, verse 16 says, dogs surround me, a pack of villains encircles me, they pierce my hands and my feet, referencing the crucifixion. There are other verses in this psalm that just point to the way in which Jesus died and mean that we often use this psalm and call it the Psalm of the Cross. But as I was reading it this morning, God actually drew me to the little description of the psalm before it begins, which says, for the director of music, to the tune of the doe of the morning, a psalm of David. And he reminded me, first and foremost, this is a psalm of David. David wrote it when he was in a tough time, when he was asking, why, God, have you forsaken me? These are his words for the time that he was in. And I don't think as he wrote them that he would have known that God was going to take his words and take his experience and his suffering and use it in such a way that it would point people to Jesus as the Messiah and bring glory to God. And I think that's so true of so many experiences in our lives, especially the hard times and the times when we suffer and the times when we ask, why, God, what was the point of that? And so often God just wants to use those moments. And he really reminded me that he's a God who wastes nothing, that he wants to use our story to bring him glory. And he reminded me of a story and a situation in my own life. A few years ago, I was in Guatemala for nearly 2 years doing mission stuff, and I'd felt God tell me to go out there. But it was a really hard season, and I ended up having a bit of a breakdown and really, really struggled and burnt out and witnessed quite a lot of suffering. And I remember coming back from Guatemala and asking God why, what was the point? I thought you told me to go, but now I don't understand why I was even there. And a few years later, I was in Mozambique, and we were in the bush on outreach, and we came across this lady on a mat outside her little shack, and she couldn't walk. And the team that we were with, we just stopped and we prayed for her, and Jesus healed her miraculously, and she was able to walk. And our whole little team were about to just walk on and go back to camp, and I really felt God say, but you need to tell her about me. And so I spoke a bit of Spanish, so I was able to communicate with our Bible pastors and was able to tell this lady about Jesus, and they were able to translate into the local dialect. And she gave her heart and her life to Jesus that day. And I remember walking back to the tents, and I remember God really, really clearly reminding me of my time in Guatemala. And he said to me, he said, Anna, do you remember that time you asked me why, when you didn't understand why I took you there or what it was all about or the suffering that you went through? And he said, if you'd never gone to Guatemala, you'd have never learnt Spanish. You'd have never been able to lead this lady to me and into an encounter with me. And he said, I'm a God who wastes nothing. You need to remember that. And so I just really felt, as I read the psalm, he reminded me of that, and that he wants to remind us of that today, that actually he's a God who wastes nothing. He wants to use our mountaintop experiences, but also our valley experiences to bring glory to him and to point people to Jesus. So that's our prayer today. Jesus, would you use our story to bring people to you? Would you use our testimony to bring you glory?